Hello, I'm Janice Karen, Director of Policy, Technology, and Innovation at the Massachusetts Health Data Consortium, or MHTC. I run our Data Governance Collaborative, also known as the DGC. We start each of our weekly meetings with a series of industry quick updates to learn about new and proposed regulations, laws, standards, industry initiatives, and other activity. Join us for this week's updates. And if you'll go to the first update, there is news. Both the CMS interoperability and prior authorization rule and the ONC HTI-1 rule have been sent to OMB. This is the last step that happens before these rules get released. So this is the final version of the CMS rule that had the provider access APIs and all the prior auth clauses and the payer-to-payer exchange via FHIR that came out last December that we commented on early this year. And then the ONC HTI-1 rule that came out in the spring that we commented on in the early summer that included a whole bunch of AI related stuff, the move to make USCDI version 3 the default standard for exchange, and a whole slew of other stuff. So you can see that they were both sent a week and a half ago to the OMB. Typically, there's a 90-day window for this review. So we should expect these to come out in January if the 90 days is observed. That's not set in stone, though. And I would remind people that there is a tradition from HHS to put stuff out in the last 2 weeks of December. So it would not be completely unreasonable to think that might happen. Did someone want to say something? No. So you can find a full list of all of the regulations that are currently under OMB review at the link on this slide. And we have no idea what's actually going to be in these, how much they've changed. There's no insight into the contents, just that they've moved into this step. So any question or comment there? All right, let's move on to the next. So the long expected, slated for October, and they just made it, ONC rule on enforcing information blocking for providers came out on Monday. It officially was published in the Federal Register today. It was a little bit unexpected. Haven't read the whole thing. It is led by ONC, but it's technically a joint ONC and CMS release. And that's because, and I'm not sure why, and there's probably some rationale in the rule that I haven't read yet, that the rule only applies to providers that are in certain CMS programs, and it does not apply to all providers. So there's still a gap. This rule was expected to fill in the gaps for information blocking oversight for everyone, and there's still a gap after this rule. So we'll have to see what the rule says about that, why they did this, and if there are plans for filling in that gap. But it's cited for a 60-day comment period. That would have taken us to exactly December 31st. But I took a look. The rule was, in fact, put in the Federal Register today. And the date that's on that rule gave us a generous extra 2 days. So the comment period on this proposed rule ends on January 2nd of 2024. So don't know a ton about what's in it yet. We'll definitely take a closer look at it. But it does outline the disincentives, which presumably includes some level of fines. It provides some information on how claims of information blocking will be investigated, and it does establish different ways that information about violations will be publicly shared. So there is an ONC blog post about the rule, which is the first link, and then the rule itself is the second link. You can follow both of them. We will almost certainly be taking a closer look at this at some point. Any questions, comments, thoughts? All right, moving on to the next regulatory item. There's also a new no surprises independent dispute resolution proposed rule. It also dropped on Monday with everything else on the planet. It is also cited for a 30-day comment period. However, it is not slated to be published in the Federal Register until Friday. So that would also give it a comment deadline of January 2nd, 2024 without the extra 2-day extension. So presumably that's what the date's going to be if they use that date for the other rule. So I've again also not read the rule. This one's the ONC rule was only about 80 pages. This one's about 450. So I only took a quick look at what it was supposed to cover so far. And it does have some requirements for additional payer information that needs to be provided at the time that payment or denial of payment is issued. There's some modifications to the open negotiation process that's supposed to happen before a formal dispute is initiated. There are some changes to the batching requirements in which items can be batched together. I took a very quick look at that, and it does look like they've expanded what can be batched together into a single batch. There are also some changes to the determination process of who's eligible and also to the payment process. So again, we'll be taking a closer look at that. You can find a fact sheet from CMS at the first link. And the second link is the Federal Register link. Right now, until the rule officially goes live, there's a preview PDF that you can download. Once it goes live, there'll be a live HTML version of the rule at that same link. Any questions or thoughts there? All right, next slide. Same day, October 30th, the White House put out an executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. And again, just read the press release and the overview, which was actually fairly lengthy in of itself and not the actual full order. But some of the things that it does, I'm not going to read all of them, but one of the things that jumped out at me, the first couple lines there, that AI developers are required to share safety test results and some other info with the government before any of the resulting models or products are publicly available. It is actually not clear to me how that will tie in with the AI development stuff that's in the HTI-1 rule, and that happens via a EHR. And so that's going to be kind of interesting to see. I also thought it was interesting that NIST has been tasked to develop some standards, tools, and tests to use with AI. The developing and publishing standards and best practices for detecting AI-generated content and authenticating content, I think, is pretty important. The call to Congress to pass national privacy legislation is just a call to Congress. Congress has been asked to act on this for a very long time, so don't hold your breath, but it's there. And federal support for privacy preserving techniques that allow AI systems to be trained while preserving privacy. So that's interesting. John Halamka, who is one of the folks who will be at our executive forum next week, he developed an interesting system that does that at Mayo. Well, his group at Mayo developed an interesting system that did that. So it'll be interesting to hear his take on that. And if you go on to the next slide. Also looking at how federal agencies use commercially available data, including data from data brokers. And there were some specific categories that were some specific mention of healthcare, which was the one thing that the main specific mention was that HHS has been directed to establish a mechanism for reporting harms from AI. I assume that'll go through either OCR or OIG. I'm not sure which. But there will presumably be some mechanism for people to report issues they have with AI that's used in healthcare that HHS is then tasked with investigating and coming up with some mechanism to deal with. And so You can see that this is literally not everything. You can find the fact sheet that I used as sort of the overview, which is itself fairly lengthy, at the link there. And if I remember correctly, there's a link to the actual full executive order on that sheet. Any questions, thoughts, comments there? Monday was a busy day. All right, let's move on then. So the next two are related. CMS has put out what they're calling decision trees, which are kind of interesting. And they're kind of graphic flowcharts that lead people through how to go through some of the no surprises processes. So in this case, it's good faith estimates for uninsured and self-pay patients. So it is very specific to the current state of what's being enforced for no surprises. So it is solely for self-pay and uninsured patients, and it does not include convening provider issues, although it does mention the idea of convening providers. So it's a pretty interesting document. There's nothing new there, but I still found it illuminating, and you can find it at the link. Any questions there? All right, if you go on to the next page, they also did a decision tree for helping patients decide whether they can or should engage in the independent dispute resolution. We talk a lot about the payer provider IDR process, but there's the patient process of disputing when the charge goes more than $400 over what they expect. So this also is very specific to the currently enforced components. So it only applies to self-pay or uninsured patients. And it outlines both whether the patient is eligible for the process based on their criteria, and then how to go through the process of filing the dispute. They're also, the previous one was just the decision tree, more or less. This PDF has some guidance afterwards. So there's basically a few, like I think 5 or 6 essentially facts that provide some additional information, and you can find it at that link there. So any questions on this one? All right, let's move on to the next slide. So CISA has also been busy, and they have produced, in some places they're calling it a best practice guide, in some places they're calling it a toolkit. But there's basically a new section of their website that deals with healthcare and public health cybersecurity best practices. And there's 3 main sections. They call them Know the Risks, Use Cybersecurity Hygiene, Strengthen Your Defenses, Mature Your Cybersecurity Efforts, and Address Resource Constraints. And if you follow, those each link to another section, and there's additional content there. I didn't follow it beyond that, but it's basically a bunch of different resources and guidelines, and there might be some specific, more toolkitty things like follow these steps if you go down the tree far enough. So just another place to look for information. I assume it's mostly stuff that we've all seen before, but organized in one nice, easy to find place. Any comments or thoughts there? All right, if you'll go on to the next slide. CISA also has indicated that they are in the process of updating the National Cyber Incident Response Plan, NCIRP, and that they're adding 4 areas. The first 2 sound kind of similar, but they're adding what they're calling unification, which is about partnership and collaboration and making sure that diverse groups are involved in the process. Shared responsibility, which is more about how you actually, after some looking at the 2, this one is more about the actual day-to-day working together process and having shared responsibility there, learning from the past and keeping pace with evolution. there's not a ton of information yet. It's still they're basically, this is an announcement that they plan on doing this, so there's not, the information of what they're actually adding isn't there in excruciating detail, but they do have more about each of these areas on the announcement, and you can find it at that link. Any questions there? All right, then let's go on to the next slide. If you'll pause there for a moment. I hope you learned a lot from our quick updates. If you're interested in finding out more about the DGC and its other activities, email me at dgc@myhealthdata.org. That email address is also on your screen.